Dear friends, colleagues, I want to introduce to you the greatest investigator, the greatest person in the whole America and actually in the whole Cantonese world and even in Chinese world, Marjorie Chen, who is what you have position now in Ohio State University? Is it
associate professor?
So I see. Professor, associated professor, right? You call it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, at the Ohio State University, and I have been there. It's a great place, very big, very quiet, very green. I like it very much. And well, actually, I think everybody knows about Marjorie Chen. I have never met a person who said, who is she? No, everybody, yes, of course, I know her. Of course. It doesn't. It's like, it's a person who, if you study Chinese in America, Cantonese, I don't, of course, Cantonese, and in China, in Hong Kong, everybody knows her. So I'm very happy to introduce her here. I want you, my Russian friends and colleagues, to know Marjorie Chen as well, because she has achieved a lot, really a lot, and she's like an icon for us. And we can only hope to be as she is now. So, without no further interference from my side, today's theme is Chжуншань dialect and the zero initial. Marjorie, please.
Elena, thank you so much for such a warm welcome. Okay, first of all, I can't see you guys put up your hands or anything like that, but if you have never heard of the zero initial, this will be your introduction to it. And the Chжуншань dialect, on this first slide for the title, I show you the map of Guangdong province and where Chжуншань is located. Okay, and then I just include the abstract. What is the phonetic realization of the so-called zero initial? How does that differ from dialect to dialect and even from one sub-variety to another, such as the Chжуншань dialect versus Standard Cantonese? Now, this presentation illustrates the phonetic realization of the zero initial in the Chжуншань dialect, and I'll also provide some contrastive examples from Standard Cantonese. Now, the differences have implications for translanguaging, be it for communication by dialectal speakers or bilingual or multilingual speakers. Now, so the outline? I'll start with what is the zero initial. Now, I presume everyone is familiar with the Beijing dialect, and this is from one of those Chinese sources. And so for the Shengmu, for the initials, it's listed as being 22. And as I showed here, where it is that zero with the O slash, that's for the zero initial. That is a syllable that has a zero onset. Okay, that's how it's analyzed. The slide, the sharing part hides my, can I hide that? Yeah, okay, now I can see what I have on the screen. Okay. Now for the Churchill dialect, then location-wise, this is from a 1987 map of dialects, and so you can see the province of Guangdong, and it's a location that has actually a lot of different languages and sub-varieties of Chinese. And so within the area of the orangey, that you can see Chжуншань there, and a little bit bigger display of it. And here, zooming in further, you can see Chжуншань, and then Guangzhou there. I hope you can see my cursor. And then Almond over here. So Chжуншань is basically between Guangzhou and Almond, Macau. And in fact, historically, Macau was part of Chжуншань County. Now, a little bit of historical background based on my MA thesis, not exactly 4 decades ago. Han Dynasty, what is Chжуншань County was part of Panyu County. And then in the Tang Dynasty, it became part of Dongguan. And in the Song Dynasty, at the beginning of Song Dynasty, it was established as a separate county called Xiangshan Xian. And then the Republic of China, in honor of Sun Yat-sen, Sun Yat-sen, the name of his birthplace was officially changed by the Guangdong provincial government from Xiangshan Xian to Zhongshan based on the name Nakayama that Dr. Sun adopted when he was seeking political asylum in Japan. And so basically then you look at the old gazetteers, then you have Jiangshan Zhenjun. Okay. And the very first study of the linguistic study of the Zhongshan dialect is that by Jiao Yanren in 1948 and was reprinted in 1956. The fieldwork that he was conducting for Zhongshan dialect was in 1929, and then a little bit later in 1939 in Hawaii. And the dialect variety that he was looking at was the dialect of the administrative center, Xuqi, and that was considered the prestigious standard variety in that county and is representative of that county. So that Zhongshan dialect, the Xuqi dialect, is the one that is used in education, both in the county of Zhongshan and also in Hawaii. So when Zhongshan was in Hawaii, the dialect that was used in teaching Cantonese was Zhongshan dialect and not the Hong Kong standard Cantonese. There was an earlier study by J.D. Ball in 1897 on the Zhongshan dialect, but that one seemed to be somewhat different, and it has some of the pronunciations that somehow sounds a little bit more rural. And the Zhongshan dialect shares many features that are found in Guangzhou, and they all belong to the Guangfu Pian of the Yue dialect group. And Zhongshan dialect is also influenced by and is influencing surrounding dialects in the county. So all three major dialect groups, Kejia, Min, and Yue, are spoken in that county. In a separate presentation elsewhere, I talked a little bit more about that part. Now, the material from Zhang Bohui and others on there are 3 volumes from back in the late 1980s to 1990 on a number of the different varieties of Cantonese, and Zhongshan was one of them. And the display here then shows you the phonological system. And among them then is the shengwu, the initials, and then so you have the 0 there. And in this presentation, I will just focus on the 0 initials in syllables with a high vowel in the nucleus. Now, the speaker that I'm using for this presentation is my mom. She's now 93. So I recorded her in December when I was there last time. I normally go to Vancouver in the summer, but then this year with the pandemic, I ended up staying put in Columbus. Now, so what you have here then, the first example is the one for coat hanger. Okay, I hope you can all hear it. Everybody hear it? If not, make it louder. I'll do it again. Okay, so if you hear carefully, you can hear that there is no homoorganic glide, not E, right? In E. Okay, second example. Raincoat. Okay, so in this one, I'm focusing on the E, but you can see also that the 2 syllables both have 0 onset. Later, I'll focus on the first syllable. You can see, if you look at the spectrogram, and later I show you by comparison of standard Cantonese. Okay, so one more time. Okay, 语一. And then the E in between 2 syllables, right? So if she's pronouncing it with all the the gliding and things like that, then you would expect to see there is no break, right? But what you can see visually here is that there is. Okay.
洗衣粉，洗衣粉。
So 洗衣粉, right? So there's a break there, right? Okay. And then the one for black damp, actually, I had to look that up.
乌音，乌音。
Okay, again, I chose 2 syllables where both of them have a 0 onset. One more time.
우音
Okay. And then also before the the I sound is also there. And anyone who knows standard Cantonese say, oh, that sounds so different, right?
英國
Okay. So Engko. And of course, my mom doesn't have the labialized guo for England. And right now in Hong Kong, a lot of people also don't have it. But in terms of Zhongshan dialect, it has been, the labialization has been lost for the O sound for a long time. Okay. And then heron.
女英雄
Okay.
女英雄
And so you can see there's a break there. There's no, continuing glide sort of thing where you had trouble seeing in Pratt where is the syllable break. And also, I put here, somehow the PowerPoint doesn't have the superscript, so I had to do a little bit of creative work putting in there. Zhongshan dialect also has a post-stopping phenomenon, and that shows up in the pronunciation. It's not just simply nasal, it's nu, right? So you can see that there's some kind of stoppage there, and it shows up in her pronunciation in this case.
女英雄
Okay, one more time.
女英雄
Okay. And then the word for raincoat. Again, I was trying very hard to find words where there are all sorts of zero onset.
雨衣
Okay, so
雨衣
right, you can see very clear, sharp start. And again, for the nasals, so whether you have the or ng, you can have the post-stopping phenomenon. And that's a phenomenon actually that has also been mentioned back in the 1930s by Mathero for the Chang'an dialect. So I don't know if there's any relationship there, but anyhow, that's what we have in Zhongshan Cantonese.
雨雨雨雨
Okay, one more time.
雨雨
Yu. Okay, and then again what we had earlier, but this time focusing on the u.
烏煙烏煙
Okay, and then the u in the middle.
白烏龍白烏龍
Okay, one more time.
白烏龍
Okay, so some observations and comparisons. Now, the zero initial, as you can see, is a smooth onset with potential optional rather stop, but I don't seem to see it in my mom's there. I think nothing so sharp to sound it. And crucially, there's no homorganic glide preceding the high vowels, and the high vowels here are I, U, and U. Okay. And now, one thing to observe here, for those who do know standard Cantonese, Hong Kong or Guangzhou variety, that this contrasts with standard Cantonese, where one does find the presence of homorganic glides. So you have the yiga, yingguo, yuyi, wuyin, etc. Okay, and so rather than just depend on my pronunciation, I have a friend who read the same word list that I gave to my mother. She happened to also she was in Vancouver visiting her mother, and so I got her to record for me. And so here I have on display the Zhongshan pronunciation on the left screen and the standard Cantonese on the right side. So it's the same word, right? And as you can see from the phonetic transcription that I have there, for the Zhongshan variety, then there's no onset, no glide onset. For the standard Cantonese pronunciation, there's the w and there's the y. And visually, you can see that the two displays in Pratt look really different, right? So let me play the two for contrast.
烏煙
Okay, and then the Standard Cantonese one.
互現互現
Okay, the Zhongshan one.
烏煙烏煙
And
互現互現
right, so auditorily you can hear the difference. Visually you can see the difference in the waveform, right? And also it's interesting, you can see in Pratt in the broadband spectrogram that the U is very, very clearly displayed from the very beginning all the way to the end, whereas it's a very funny kind of thing happening with the glide there, right? So that the W is actually quite long into the syllable. Okay, and I provide one more example for contrast. I was doing that last night. Okay, so this one for raincoat. Okay, so you can see it's drastically different, isn't it, between the two? So here you got E, E, right? Here you got U, E, okay?
語意語意
And then standard.
語意語意語意
Okay, so you can hear the difference very, very, very clearly. And the difference between the two, right? So here's your initial glide component. And for her pronunciation also, because she has the initial glide for the second syllable, there's actually no break there, right? It's yu continue there. The pronunciation with the zero onset, there's a break, right? Yu. Okay, one more time.
語
Oh.
語意
Okay.
語意
Okay, so those are the examples and questions. There's more, but this is how much I got done last night. Okay, so the thing then is in Zhongshan Cantonese, you have zero onset. By zero onset, you really have nothing there for the high before the high vowels. For Standard Cantonese, it's there. So for someone like me who went from Zhongshan to Hong Kong and spent a couple of years there, then I start picking up some of the glide, right? So I end up kind of mixing the two. And in 普通话, what you have is, and I didn't provide any sound files. I presume most people are familiar with 普通话, but you basically have the initial on-glide. So 衣架, 英国, 雨衣, 乌烟. So what you find then, in that case, 普通话 is like Standard Cantonese in having the home organic glide before the high vowels. Now, but the thing though is that for Mandarin dialects, it's not the case that all the dialects behave like 普通话 or 北京话. Some of them behave differently, and I haven't looked into that, but like one of our grad students, she had spent some time in Sichuan, and she actually, I haven't recorded her, but let's say, for example, when she says the 1, 2, 3, the E, R, san, so it's E, not E. So I don't really know how many people who are Mandarin speakers pronounce 普通话 with potentially zero onset in some cases. But that's obviously interesting to think about when you are either learning 普通话, learning Standard Chinese, or a speaker of another variety. How different or how similar is your variety from that of 普通话? And what you find is that in the pinyin romanization, actually the phonetic realization of the home organic glide is spelled out. So we have yi, ying, yu for the u, and then w for u, etc. So it's there, even though there doesn't seem to be much emphasis on how that is pronounced. And I don't know how often people who are teaching about the standard Chinese sound system and Chinese linguistics in talking about the zero initial, how much they pay attention to the phonetic realization. But interestingly, for the Wei Zhao's romanization, the phonetic realization of the home organic glide is spelled out in all syllables, but with one important exception, the letter I and not the letter YI. Now, for example, in the classical changes or book of changes, what you see in pinyin would be YIJING. But if you had looked at some of the early translations of the I Ching, you'll find it's the letter I and the CHING. But the thing that is very interesting, for Wei Zhao's has simply the letter I. So you look at the Matthews Dictionary, for example, the letter I as the initial letter in the syllable only occurs in the syllable I or yi, but not elsewhere. So yin, ying, and things like that has the YING there, or the YIN. So yin, yang, there's no problem whether you're using Wei Zhao's or pinyin. So one thing that occurred to me last night when I was looking at this is, was there a time when the I or yi syllable in Beijing dialect simply the smooth onset, so that the Wei Zhao's romanization reflects that? Or was there some other rationale for spelling the yi sound differently from how Wei Zhao's romanized the yin and yin? That I don't know. I'm curious, and I looked into that. And the other thing too is that the Wei Zhao's romanization is after all based on Wade and on Giles. And so what's the original Wade different then from the Wei Zhao's? That's something that I haven't looked into, and I'm going to be curious to find out. Now, the thing then is, so what we have for a clear picture is some dialects of Chinese where you have zero onset with smooth onset or maybe a cross stop, and then you have some dialects, so that would reflect Zhongshan Cantonese. And then you have some dialects such as Putonghua and Standard Cantonese where you have a home organic glide that is there when you have the high vowels. Now, phonemically, you could potentially then not have the spell out the Y and the W and things like that. But so the only case, if that's happening with the Wei Zhao, that's the only place where they did it. So that letter E then is accompanied by the year, right? So basically it's predictable. So in terms of romanization and phonemicization, that home organic glide can essentially be omitted, right? But it's there to help remind people that there is that home organic glide to be pronounced. Now, when you start learning English, I don't know, I presume a lot of students in Russia also learn English, right? And so what you find in English is an interesting phenomenon where there is a contrast between what would be a home organic glide and the absence of one. So in English, we have the letter E and the archaic second person plural ye, or sometimes you have the pseudo archaic with like EO English, pub, and things like that. That's not really historical, but people use it to give the illusion that they're, it is part of the old English pronunciation, things like that. And then you also have things like ear versus year. And in fact, it was when I was in Seattle as a graduate student, and there was a visiting scholar from Beijing, and he had problems distinguishing and pronouncing the difference between ear and year. So every time he tried to say ear, he ends up saying year. So, and I think for younger generations, that's not the case anymore. But for the old generations who who are studying English much later in life, then and especially they don't have linguistic background sort of thing, they're more likely to not make that contrast. And so their pronunciation becomes that much more accented, right? And some other examples, and I'm not sure how, what later English people do in fast speech, like the ing and in English, and like the flying. You say flying or flying? If you say fast, I presume it could end up sounding like flying. And then you have English with the ing, right? But then people, basically English speakers will have no problem pronouncing a syllable y-i-n-g as ying, right? They won't say English, right, when they mean English. And then there's very few cases of contrast for in English. So the best I can do for monosyllable would be like ooh la la versus woo to woo someone, right? Okay. And there's other examples like sees and things like that. So so basically then you have so basically my presentation today is basically for fun, looking into the zero initial and what happens in Zhongshan, and then exploring beyond Zhongshan what happens in other languages, other dialects. Now, in Chinese, the traditional conception of the syllable is that of the initial and the final. And the initial has a consonant, and so the glide is not part of the initial. The final is composed of an optional glide. In terms of historical phonology, that would be the distinction between the kaiko and the heko. And so kaiko would have the option, would not have the glide that heko would. Right? And then you have the nuclear vowel, and that's one component that is required. And then you have an optional consonant or glide. And then depending on how you analyze things, you might see as being a diphthong. But in any case, I should make the C optional too. But anyhow, or maybe not. So basically, C would be either something there or the zero initial, right? And for those who are more familiar with the historical phonology, then the final has a subcomponent of the that glide, and then the rhyme. The rhyme is the portion that has the vowel and the coda or glide. And so the Chinese conceptualization of the syllable is different from that of the Western tradition, where you have the syllable consisting of the onset and the rhyme. For Chinese, because of historical phonology, the rhyme cannot include the glide. And so the Chinese system then has a final that is distinct from that of the rhyme. Okay. So basically then, what you have for Chinese then, the initial then could be the zero onset, whether or not it's actually occupied by something, right? So the contemporary studies of the phonological system of Chinese dialects that posit the zero initial tend to gloss over its phonetic realization. And I think the fact that speakers of Putonghua may or may not realize how they're pronouncing their ER sound sort of thing, and what shows up in the romanization is something worthwhile for me when I teach the Chinese linguistics course to remind students to think about it. Now, even though studies don't tend to pay much attention to how the zero initial is realized, its production is crucial, right? Especially when you're looking at the difference between Zhongshan versus Standard Cantonese, Putonghua versus other varieties of Mandarin. And if you're trying to acquire English, then you have to make that distinction of E versus E and U versus U, so that you sound more proficient and more native-like. So, and then if you are communicating, mixing your different varieties, let's say speaking Cantonese and English and things like that, then you want to be able to control. If you're trying to control for the distinction, you need to make those distinctions, right? Okay, and so that's where I'm going to end. And so this is a photo of my mom and me from December Christmas Eve at the shopping mall in Vancouver. Okay, thank you everyone for listening. And just a few select references. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. It's a great one, and I think everybody just astonishing how it is not so easy as they thought it should be. So yeah, it's really very interesting, and I know that phonology is difficult. It's not an easy one, and it's always there are a lot of questions actually for us to study. And well, we are giving people some moments to write their questions, and just you can open the chat. Yes, it's stage one.
I did do that.
The one that is writing for you in my name, it's not actually me, it's my students. Sometimes yeah, just don't pay attention for the name. It's not me. Me is talking here. And I have a question because it's often discussed among teachers, Chinese and Cantonese as well. What about standardization? Is there a possibility to have a standardization in Cantonese, especially for phonetics? Because for Mandarin there is a Putonghua, but for Cantonese it's very difficult. And as you told us today, there is a difference in Zhongshan variant and other Cantonese. So is there any possibility that there will be a standardization, and if it needed to be, or is it just we speak Cantonese as we like to speak, as our parents spoke it, and something like this?
Yeah, so two things, right? One would be the actual pronunciation and things like that. So essentially what you have are two major sub-varieties, especially because over time in the 20th century, you have Guangzhou Cantonese and Hong Kong Cantonese. And I think if I am not mistaken, it's not written in black and white, but anyhow, I think Hong Kong Cantonese has more variation in it. But even within Guangzhou versus Hong Kong Cantonese, for example, the yin ping tone in Guangzhou Cantonese tends to still have that high falling contour. So the 5-3 versus 5-5, right? Zhongshan dialect will have 5-5, the high level tone. So, and then in Hong Kong Cantonese, over time, the younger generation or even the middle-aged generation, they don't have the high falling, right? And then there are also tone mergers taking place in Hong Kong. I don't think that's happening so much in Guangzhou Cantonese. Maybe some people can tell me otherwise. So the thing then is, for standardization, you're going to have to sort out those kind of mergers and things. So are you going to be very conservative and say you have to have this tone, this and that sort of thing, and you may end up with very small percentage of Hong Kongers who speak this standard variety, right? And then of course right now Hong Kong is in the midst of flux sort of thing. What's going to happen to Cantonese in Hong Kong? That's going to be something to watch for in the next few decades, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe this might not be the time to worry so much about standardization and things of that kind, but or maybe my colleagues in Hong Kong, I don't know if Andy's here or not, but anyhow, maybe he might have something to say about that. And then in terms of romanization, there are several for people overseas learning Cantonese. The Yale romanization for Cantonese is the one that is most commonly used, precisely because there's so much pedagogical materials. So you have dictionaries, textbooks, and things like that are in Yale romanization. For Hong Kong, it's been at least a couple of decades that they have introduced Yip Ping and that's becoming more commonly used. But so in, let's say in my Pleco dictionary, I find that the Yuping romanization is used there, which was very helpful when I was doing some work. And so it's right there and I can just copy. Mainland China has a textbook. I don't know whether it has been revised since then, but they use a different romanization and they have dictionaries that use that romanization. So it's kind of more similar to Pinyin romanization, but because Cantonese is not emphasized for teaching and things like that in mainland China, then that romanization system is not really that well known, right? And then of course, so the one that is better known is the one in Hong Kong. But even then, if you look at the umbrella and the 2019-2020 Hong Kong protests, let's say for something like 加油, then what romanization you see there is one that they use that whatever they felt comfortable with, and it wasn't Yuping. But and then again too in Hong Kong, they're not following some particular romanization system, but what they feel comfortable in, knowing what they know of English and how they might want to romanize it, and they might looking at it, they can read it, no problem, right?
Yeah, I heard from last year, Andy Chin has organized this how to say it, Cantonese 1 week workshop. It was very interesting, and attendees mostly they were Cantonese native speakers, and it was very interesting. They told me that they use different how to say it, not styles, but they use urbanization system, but differently to communicate with each other using Cantonese. So they use Roman, how to say it, not words, just syllables, right? And to write in Cantonese, but differently. And I said, but how do you understand each other? I said, well, it's almost the same, but there are some differences, of course. But for me, it's very difficult. If you change one syllable, if you change only one, I think, well, perhaps it's different. Perhaps you have to pronounce it differently. And it's a really big problem for me to learn Cantonese, because I have started using materials that were published in Guangzhou, just in mainland China. And then I had a teacher from Hong Kong, and she different ones, and it was like, I can't understand if it's the same in conversation. Well, sometimes this, sometimes not. Oh, it's very confusing actually. And they have a question in stage. Can you see it? Or should I read it?
No, I can't see it. Yeah, it doesn't show up at my end. And do I need to refresh my screen? Let's see.
No, you don't need it. You have to go to stage. You are now looking at the backstage. Yeah, there are.
Why don't I let you read it?
Okay. Thank you. Very interesting. Yeah. Does the phonetic system affect the changes that occur with phonetics?
I don't think it's driven that way. I think basically I haven't studied the Konglish daily, and I hope this stays online sort of thing. But anyhow, so I don't know how they are doing their romanization, but I think the important thing is they are native speakers of Cantonese, Hong Kong Cantonese. They are familiar with English, and they try to transcribe the Cantonese based on, however they can see it, however they and visualize the pronunciation. The people who are familiar enough with the language, for example, they may take a little while to figure out the letter J versus the letter Y, what is the phonemic value of it in one system versus the other, whether Y or J, right? But I but basically, I don't think it's driven by the romanization to the change. So I think not much more is the case in Hong Kong of language contact with so many people from different sub-varieties. So for all I know, maybe it's Zhongshan Cantonese that influenced the high-level tone in Hong Kong Cantonese, and the loss of the labelization of of the word in all sound, like gong, wong, gok, guok, and things like that, right? So the difference is there already. You listen to people, the younger generation often don't have that liberalization, right? But you have it, then it's easier when you're learning Mandarin, right? Because guojia and things like that is there.
Yeah, but why why many younger generations don't have it or have anything? What influenced them?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? What causes it? And this is why my basic sentence, I think, has to do with language contact, right? So you think about creolization, you think about flattening of contrasts, right? So if there's enough people who don't make a distinction between gok and guok, right, then the leveling out is going to be more likely of the switch of the merger of gok and guok than for people to distinguish between them. And perhaps even more difficult would be cases of, let's say, the yin xiang, yang xiang, yin qu, yang qu. So for someone like me learning Hong Kong Cantonese as a kid, I didn't know that there was two level tones in qu tone and two rising tones in xiang. So I just produced them with my Zhongshan pronunciation. And in some presentation I've done of Tan Yat-sen's 1924 Cantonese speech, and analyzing his tone production, he's just like me, or I'm just like him. He doesn't make a distinction between yin xiang, yang xiang, yin qi, and yang qi. But no, even though he was in Hong Kong for a long time and in Guangzhou sort of thing, he didn't pick up that contrast and pronounce it himself. Right? So the thing then is, and if there are enough Zhongshan speakers or people like that in Hong Kong sort of thing, maybe what you do find is that there are people who have been merging the two distinctions, right? But the two different level tones and two different rising tones, they're more difficult to maintain to make the contrast, but easier to merge them, right? So in terms of sound change, that would be the direction one would expect.
Oh, I see. Because for Russians, it's really difficult to understand how you can speak differently from generation to generation. How it is possible? Because our grandparents are speaking the same way as we are. Perhaps some of the specialists in Russian language will tell me differently, but nevertheless, we don't have this much difference. Perhaps there are some we something like dialects in Russian, not like in Chinese, not like these dialects, but not such a big variety. But there are some, but still we can understand everybody, and it's not much difference actually. And we have a feeling that our language is not changing at all for hundreds of years. Perhaps in grammar, yes. In words, yes, of course, but in phonetics. So when we hear that in Chinese and especially in Cantonese, that you can speak differently, living together and speak differently, and young generation can speak differently from their fathers and mothers and their grandparents, even if they learn different languages. We as well, we learn different languages as well, but it almost never influence our Russian language. Perhaps it's because we have a standard Russian language for, well, almost already hundreds of years. So there's standard phonetics, standard grammar, and so on. So for us, it's like a very difficult question to understand how it happens. Why?
Yeah, I think when you have a more stable situation where the government has the major impact on what the children learn, like for Hong Kong, you don't at least I don't think so. You don't have the, very prescriptive idea of, okay, you need to learn this, and you don't pronounce it this way, then you're not speaking standard Cantonese, right? So what you have then is a more, basically the British government, when Hong Kong was a colony, they really don't care how you speak Cantonese, right? That's not their focus. So, right? And so basically you don't have a school curriculum where there's a major imposition of what is considered standard, right? And so when you don't have that, then there's that much more flexibility. And then you have all the influx. You think about a number of people who come from different parts of China, different parts of Guangdong province into Hong Kong, going from a small fishing village kind of setting in 1842 into the present with very influxes of immigrants, right? So you had a really vast, language contact situation in Hong Kong, the kind of thing that you don't have, let's say in Moscow, perhaps. I don't know the situation in Russia, but you have and I think essentially what you find probably when studying Shenzhen, what's going on there, where you got a very small place before, and then all of a sudden you have all the huge number of migrants going there. What's happening to the language there? So in Hong Kong, between the fact that you have different ways of migration from mainland China, from different parts of China, so I think the contact-inducing of language change is very, very much prevalent in Hong Kong. And then the fact that you don't have a prescriptive system that's imposed by the government onto the education, then how your peers talk could potentially have a greater influence on you than your parents and your grandparents.
Yes, of course. And we have already 3 or 4 generations that have to learn how to speak proper Russian. And I think that's because that's why we all speak not the same, but if we compare it to Cantonese, I think we all speak the same language in Russian. Because
yes, very much so. Yeah, and I think, in the 20th century into the 21st century in Hong Kong, there's been major changes, and various scholars in Hong Kong have been looking at those mergers and things of that kind, right? Yeah. So, and then in terms of and then in terms of
you go first.
And then in terms of the writing, that's the same kind of thing, right? Where you don't have standardization. So where do you write the Chinese character in one way or the other? Basically they're in free variation, and right? Because you're not required to write.
I know that a lot of those who speak Cantonese as their mother language live in America, and does their Cantonese differ from the one that is in Hong Kong or mainland China?
Well, in North America, what you have is the people before the change in immigration process, both in Canada and the U.S. in the 1960s. So before that, then most of the immigrants come from the rural areas, from Ziyi, Zhongshan, and places like that. Then after 1960s, mid-1960s, both in Canada and U.S. around the same time. I think Canada followed the U.S. Then you have a lot of people coming from Hong Kong, and so that changes things a lot. So when you go to Chinatowns in the past, when I was growing up, most people speak the dialect, one of Taishan or one of those. Zhongshan is not as popular as Taishan dialect. But now you go into Chinatown, what you're going to hear is more Hong Kongish Cantonese, or some people speak Mandarin. But those old rural varieties, you may have some old people who might use it, but you don't hear that so much anymore. So that is changing in U.S. and Canada, and I presume something like that might be happening in other diaspora in Chinese communities.
Because I always tell my students to learn Cantonese, to try at least, because it's very, and it's like a language for many countries where Chinese people live, not only in China, it's in Asia, in America, in Canada, and I just want to be sure which type of Cantonese they should learn to understand.
Oh, definitely learn Hong Kong Cantonese.
Learn Hong Kong, right? Oh,
Mhm. Yeah.
okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
We are relieved. Is there any possibility that because of recent situation in Hong Kong, that Hong Kong Cantonese variety can become something like a standard for other Cantonese speaking places?
I think what people in Hong Kong would need to do is prepare more pedagogical materials.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Right? The more you do, then that those textbooks become more popular, then that would be the variety they'll be learning.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right? And of course, if they watch films and things like that, Cantonese films are all produced in Hong Kong.
I have a student, she's a Chinese girl, and she told me she's living in the north of China, I think. It's near Mongolia. She's living somewhere there. And when I asked her what very far from Hong Kong. And when I asked her what films do you like, she said, I like Hong Kong movies. I said, really? It's so unusual. I said, yeah, because when she's something like 22, 23, I think. She said, when I was a little girl, Hong Kong movies were so different. They were so interesting, much more interesting than Chinese movies. And she said, that's why I like them. Because it was very, Western, I think, in that sense.
Right.
And
I think among other things, for example, the Hong Kong humor has mixtures of Westernization in there, sort of thing. So it can, I think, from that perspective, along with you're basically trying to appeal, it's very commercial based, right? You get people to go into the theater to watch your film, then you're going to make big profit, right? So you're catering to a clientele, right? In a way that, trying to be as exciting as possible. Hey, let me tell you a funny little story. One of my former advisees, she's Korean, and she's teaching somewhere right now. I don't mention names, but anyhow, because she's Korean, she doesn't know different varieties of Chinese. So she's watching all these TV series, and then when she came to North America, she went to a university, not mine at that time, to study Chinese, and then she found, to her shock, that it's a totally different variety than what she had been watching on TV, because she was watching a Cantonese TV series. And then all of a sudden she's learning Mandarin in school. Yeah. And then nobody was telling her that this subtitles and things like that, and the pronunciation are Cantonese, right? And so until she went to do her undergraduate, in North America, and then picking up Chinese, and then found out Chinese was Mandarin and not what she was listening to all the while that she was in Seoul, Korea.
That's funny. It's like
learning, she ended up knowing another variety of Chinese just by accent.
Yeah, it happens. Many our students, because in Russia we learn Mandarin, where we don't learn Cantonese because there wasn't any interest some time ago, but now it's rising, and there are some who have already learned, and some of them are learning in China, mainly in China, in Hong Kong, by themselves, with teachers and so on. And but many students who learn Mandarin, they go to travel in China and to Hong Kong as well, and for their shock, Mandarin is absolutely different from Cantonese. There's nothing similar, and when they come back, they always, why do I learn Mandarin? I can speak it only in China. It's so disturbing. I said, well, you knew when you chose Mandarin that it will be difficult, but at that time we don't want for you to be afraid that Mandarin is just the beginning. It's
Right.
like, Mandarin is for beginners, Cantonese is for those who are advanced. So it's more difficult. You just have to learn it for the whole life. But it is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, well, in our department, we have been offering, we haven't been able to do every year, but we have been offering conversational Cantonese for Mandarin speakers. So basically, then you have Mandarin, whether you learn Mandarin as a language learner or you're a native speaker of Mandarin, then we're offering this conversational Cantonese course so that you can pick up some colloquial spoken Cantonese. So maybe have offered such a
great.
course in your.
I know that some universities in
Right?
Russia have tried to have a group that will be studying Cantonese, but there were those who desire to study, or just too less amount to open the group. So, and no materials as well, and so it's a little bit difficult. But I think that these attempts will appear more and more often, because we have a lot of people coming from Hong Kong to travel here in Russia, and they don't speak Mandarin. Well, they can understand Mandarin, but
Right.
it's difficult for them. And so I hope.
Yeah. So one semester, one term of conversation Cantonese.
I think it's not a big deal to have one term, several months of basic, just like very, very basic things, especially for those who already started to learn Mandarin. It won't be so difficult. So, but students are always too tired to learn. They don't want to learn something more. I have a student who went to China for his language practice. He went to Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, and I advised him to start to learn Cantonese. Well, actually, I advised all of them, but only he tried. And now he's working in Shenzhen, and he's using Cantonese to speak with people. And he's working business, some business, and he told me that I use Cantonese to describe our projects as well as Mandarin, and mostly Cantonese, because they work with Hong Kong companies, and others companies. And he said that, well, learning Cantonese is very, very good for me.
Yeah, that's the thing. He had lots of incentives, right?
I do hope that students who are listening for us now will hear my hint and will start to learn Cantonese.
Yes,
and his salary is very high. Yeah, I tell you, his salary is very high. So I hope that in the year we will discuss more than just phonetics, grammar, and corpora. We will discuss maybe books, new books, and new learning materials as well. Yeah, I do hope so, that this year will give us a little bit.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Marjorie, thank you very much. It was very nice to talk with you and to hear your presentation. And I do hope that we all enjoy it. And it was so great to hear from you and to see you, at least like this. Okay, thank you very much.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for hosting this.
Yes.
It's a lot of work.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all who have been helping us today, the whole team, and it was a big day for us. And I do hope that everybody learned a lot new things about Cantonese, and will continue to do it for the next year at least.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and I hope we will meet on some events recently, or maybe a year from now on our festival, because it's a regular event now. And I do hope perhaps it will be in person, but one can only hope that everything will be okay.
That's right. But minimally virtually, right?
It's very good. It's already very good. Okay, thank you very much, and have a good day, because it's morning in the States, and I do hope it will be a great day too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Now, how do I get out of here?